Good afternoon, everyone. Well, first of all, obviously, I want to begin by wishing everyone is doing well and staying healthy. My name is Alberto Gomez. I am a founding partner of Adara Ventures, an enterprise tech venture capital GP based in Madrid. I'm also the vice president of ASCRI, the Spanish Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. There are 230 members with GPs, LPs, and advisors that are part of ASCRI, our association, and we work together with them in our commitment to sustainability and social inclusion. It's important, as always, now that startups, to support startups and SMEs, they need capital. We believe that private equity and venture capital are part of the solution, but again, as always, with ESG criteria. We believe in the need for for businesses in general to commit to the 2030 agenda in putting in place initiatives to achieve the sustainability development goals. As an example, ASCRI has been admitted as a participating member in the United Nations Global Compact, which is an important initiative that joins, where we join others, other members of our association in ESG VC and social impact. And now this is our 14th webinar that is taking place since the middle of March. So we have remained very active since the beginning of the pandemic. So with that, I want to thank the participants of this webinar. First, Cyril Guif from the European Investment Fund, Jose Moncada from La Bolsa Social, Carlos Fish from Seaya Ventures, Davida Castani from Galdana Ventures, and Maria Merri-del-Val from Atalea Partners, who will also serve as moderator of this panel. I want to thank them all for accepting the invitation to be in this panel, which has an objective to highlight, again, how venture capital general partners are implementing ESG policies and also to analyze best practices that can be applied. And also to highlight the differences between ESG policies and just dedicated social impact funds. There are 150 participants that are registered, 90% of those from VC and GP firms. So again, this indicates the interest, importance, and commitment of the members of the association to this matter. So again, welcome to the panelists, welcome to the participants, and I will hand it over to Maria to moderate the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for your introduction. I would first like to thank ASCRI, the Spanish Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, for organizing this panel that, as Alberto just said, has attracted a lot of interest. I would like also to thank the panelists that are here with us today, Cyril, David, Carlos, and Jose. Thank you so much for being here. It is an absolute pleasure for me to moderate this panel. And I also want to thank the attendees. I know it's very difficult to make time to watch webinars, but I'd like to highlight that we have a very high quality level of people connected here today, representatives from private equity, venture capital, and impact investing. Just a few housekeeping notes. This panel will last approximately 1 hour and is actually complemented by a brief session that goes live at the South Summit Forum. There will also be a 10-minute Q&A session at the end of this session. So in the platform on your screen, you can see at the bottom part of the screen a Q&A button. And feel free to write your questions there, and we will answer them at the end of the session. So, what are we aiming to achieve here today? And Alberto actually did a great explanation of the objective. We would like to clarify the difference of ESG in venture capital as a different concept from impact investing. And I will just make a small note to our private equity attendees and fund of funds. You will also see the difference between what means to integrate ESG in private equity process versus venture capital, which has a very different way of investing. I would like to introduce very briefly, I really don't want to bore you with details, but there's this very interesting working paper that the European Investment Fund has just published in June about ESG and venture capital, and that has actually inspired this webinar. Why is this? It is very simple. We are seeing that responsible investing is accelerating into the venture capital investment mainstream. And in Spain, what it means is that almost 50% of venture capital players have adhered to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing in the last 9 months. That is a lot. So the EIF has undertaken the first ever testimony on the integration of ESG considerations in venture capital, explaining very clearly the difference between ESG and impact investing. Allow me to explain these concepts. ESG is about processes. It is about how environmental, social, and governance factors are vertebrated within their investment process and are then integrated into a company's strategy, acting as value generating, so it adds operational value, for example, or value preserving levers in risk management. Allow me to give you a few examples. So cybersecurity is a key governance factor for technology companies. Consumer protection is a social factor for fintech. And then finally, environmental factors can be key for clean tech, agri-tech, or medtech. Now, what is the difference with impact investing? It is all about intentionality, about purpose. Impact investing is a distinct investment strategy, and some even say it could become a separate asset class as it seeks to generate a positive social and/or environmental impact alongside a positive financial return. These concepts, as you see, are very different. We cannot mix them, and yet both of them contribute to a much better future. Very briefly, the key findings of the EIF survey, and they will actually come up in the conversation that we're going to have just in a moment, are the following. In the first place, venture capital is still at very early stage of embedding ESG consideration in their investment processes. Second, compared to private equity, where ESG has been mostly driven by LP pressure, venture capital also find that their teams genuinely care not only about what profit a company made, but also how this profit is made. Also, venture capital finds some challenges to this adoption, and the main challenges are lack of expertise and resources on ESG issues, as well as how do you quantify ESG information. And then in fourth place, impact investing is a distinct investment strategy, and the EIF has been a catalyst and an anchor investor via the Social Impact Accelerator. It's all about intentionality and finding the correct correlation between investment returns and social or environmental impact. And with no further delay, we would like to start the conversation with the European Investment Fund, because it has set the standards of the industry in Europe regarding ESG criteria when undertaking investments. So Cyril, you are the head of social impact at the European Investment Fund. What are the main ESG criteria you scrutinize when analyzing a venture capital fund? And also, what is the main difference from your point of view between these ESG criteria applied to venture capital versus the EIF's impact investing strategy?
Thank you very much, Maria, for this introduction and for giving me the floor. It is also a pleasure for me to be sitting on this panel next to all the panelists today. Thank you for this invitation. So, a very relevant and interesting topic indeed, ESG versus impact investing. I mean, these two concepts are widely discussed and debated, and definitely deserves further clarification, because one could claim this whole push for more ESG transparency or even voluntary jumping into impact investing strategy is part of the same, let's say, umbrella or initiative, which is about making money care more, or the social aspects that are embedded within any economic activity, perhaps any human activity, but especially in any investment activity. So I would start by saying that, and thank you for referring to this working paper we've shared earlier on ESG, and also here giving some highlights on what or how does ESG differ from an impact investing activity. I would try to answer this complicated question by a simple answer. And in my view, ESG is negative screening, whereby in your investment process and in the way you transparently provide information to your investors, a GP would inform all stakeholders that with this investment, there is a will not to do harm, either to the planet or to the society or in the way the governance of the company is packaged, as opposed to impact investing, where impact investing, as you said rightly, this is not a sector. Impact investing is not a sector. Impact investing is a strategy whereby an investor seeks to, through the investment and through the portfolio it creates, demonstrate the positive correlation that exists or that should exist between addressing a social or environmental issue and the financial performance. Often, or too often, to my regrets, there is a given idea that investing in an impact strategy leads to compromise on the financial returns. And we believe it is not the case, or it should not be the case. And to the contrary, and to even be a little bit provocative, one could even claim that investing in issues, issues that affect our society, our environment at scale, is rather nowadays a commercial opportunity. So I would differentiate ESG and impact investing by saying that while ESG is about transparently sharing all the externalities linked to an investment activity, impact investing has the intentionality to solve, through innovation, through technology, social and environmental issues.
Thank you very much, Cyril. I think your answer was really comprehensive and really useful for the audience. The next question goes to David, Galdana Ventures. As a fund of funds, Galdana selects from amongst the best venture capital managers in the world. So when Galdana analyzes venture capital funds, David, is there any particular firm or geography where you have identified an ESG best practice? What strengths would you highlight? And really looking at the challenges that venture capital firms find versus ESG, we might believe that they think it's only about the E, it's only about environmental. So what advice can you give to those that are facing these challenges and are still hesitating to start the ESG voyage?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Maria, for inviting us, Altamar and Galdana, so we can share the feedback and the knowledge we've been gathering since these last 4 years operating in the venture capital space globally. So just to address your first question, since we're investing globally, I think it makes sense. I just give you a little overview on what we're seeing in the different regions in the world where we operate. For a matter of confidentiality, I won't be able to give specific names, but I hope that with some of the examples, I can illustrate the trends in each one of the geographies. So first of all, I'd like to say that what we're seeing is that Europe is clearly leading in terms of ESG globally. So what we've seen so far is, I'd say that most VC funds in Europe right now are implementing or have implemented some kind of ESG policy, which is something that it's still not happening in the US and Asia. I'd say that the main reason explaining why Europe is more advanced in this implementation, it's probably the pressure from LPs, as you were mentioning at the beginning. So it's just something that started, for example, from there was a lot of pressure from LPs in the Nordics, some public pension schemes that started asking a lot about ESG and also about public institutions like the EIF. So somehow this really encouraged the VCs to develop ESG at their level. As an example, I mean, right now we are seeing some VCs that are doing quarterly annual reporting on ESG at the portfolio levels. Also, some VCs that are reporting KPIs at each of the companies they have invested. Sometimes KPIs that they defined based on the company, business of the company, and also KPIs related to the SDGs. Moving to the US, I'd say, as I said before, it's not as developed as in Europe. We see a gap in there. We see some VCs that are starting to look at it. Some others, they don't even contemplate ESG implementation so far. What surprised us is that compared to institutional LPs in Europe, what we've seen is that institutional LPs in the US, like endowments or public pension schemes, are not that activist in requiring VCs to engage with ESG. And actually, a lot of VCs in the US are asking us just to provide them some guidance on what the European VCs are doing. And then at the third level in Asia, I'd see there's a huge disparity in there. Those VCs with local investors are not that much involved in ESG, but those with international LP bases are way more aware of the relevance of ESG. So moving into second question about the implementation at the VC level. First, there's the question on why should a VC get involved with ESG. So beyond the argument about doing good, there's also about the argument about fundraising. So being able to get with new funds. So as I mentioned before, institutional LPs are pushing their managers to get involved with ESG. And also what we are seeing is that it's not the big institutional investors, it's also family offices, that there's this generational change, and these new generations are really aware of any societal impact of their investments. So it's something that will be requiring their managers to get involved with. And then in terms of specifics of how a VC should implement a strategy, I'd say the first barrier is about knowing about ESG. So what we've found so far is that a lot of VCs don't even know what ESG is about. So overcoming this first barrier, then it leads to start asking the questions on what kind of ESG might be implemented depending on the sectors and also the stages of the VC.
Thank you very much, David. I think your answer is really important because we had the sense that when a venture capital has as this investor base just mainly family offices and mainly local, they think they might sort of not need to get into ESG. But as you're saying, more and more family offices are seeing this generational change, and venture capital has to adapt to it little by little.
Exactly.
So the next question is for Carlos. Because Seaya Ventures, it's really interesting. It was one of the first Spanish venture capital signatories of the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing, the UNPRI. And Seaya has just announced you're raising your third fund, so congratulations for that. Given the audience we have today with us, some of which have recently signed the PRI, can you tell us about how you structure ESG processes at Seaya? What best practices do you recommend to other venture capital players? And then how important do you think ESG will be in your fundraising process?
Well, thanks, Maria, for the intro, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I mean, first, at Seaya, as Ciel was mentioning, we don't consider ourselves impact investors. I think the word impact has been overused across the board in the past 2 years. And our priority is to give the best risk-adjusted returns to our investors. But liaising with what Maria was saying before, we as a team want to invest only in mission-driven founders with a purpose and positive impact in society. I mean, we look for companies that are solving real problems and redefining industries and promoting a sustainable development. We want to avoid the growth at all costs mentality, and I think in the past 12 months we've seen a switch between companies that were historically raising money just because they were growing their top line and growing at all costs without unit economics, and now historically we've always looked for sustainable growth. And I think overall the VC industry in Spain has been more about capital efficiency, sustainable growth, rather than growth at all costs. I mean, there are clear examples in our portfolio of companies with positive impacts and also positive returns, such as Cabify, which is the first mobility app in Europe and Latin America to be 100% carbon neutral, Wallbox, which designs, manufactures, and distributes smart electric vehicle chargers, Clarity, which is a software that probably many of you know that allows asset managers to allocate capital taking into account social impact, or Movo, which is an electric micromobility company, multimodal. I mean, at Seaya, just to give you a little bit of history, at the beginning we started having a more informal approach to ESG, and then we signed UNPRI that gave us a clear framework on how to address ESG. I mean, since then we have evolved and we have now a more standardized process that includes ESG in all phases. And I think you're right, Maria. I think ESG is about process. First, in the deal flow part of the business, we avoid certain industries which are obvious, like, I don't know, alcohol and gaming and oil and gas, but other industries that we believe cause indirect harm, as for example, social networks. So it's more on the part of do not harm. And then doing our due diligence in the companies that we analyze, and during our investment committees, we have a specific section in our investment memos that addresses ESG. If there are any red flags, we would then do a deep dive to address it. Finally, we are now in the process of establishing standardized set of ESG KPIs per company to be reported at board level, and then to be able to track the evolution. This is a challenging task because to find KPIs or metrics that are comparable across the different companies is a challenge. And then it's not only about reporting them, but also about tracking the evolution and then acting if they do not perform according to plan. I think there's still a lot of room to grow, to improve, and we have the idea to start reporting ESG at an LP level, but we haven't yet. I mean, to finish, I just wanted to mention, and I think this was mentioned before, that from a returns point of view, we firmly believe that companies with positive impact, I mean, attract significantly more capital and perform better in the long term. I mean, there's a premium to be paid for such companies, and they can access additional pools of capital with lower cost of capital. So I mean, liaising with the before said, I don't think you need to really give up returns for impact in some cases, and there's some arbitrage to be done, and there's extensive pools of capital of, again, clean tech funds and impact funds, and even global and local institutions promoting these sustainable investments that help you really push the companies forward and grow them further.
Thank you, Carlos. Really, your speech is music for my ears, because not only do you understand clearly the difference between impact investing, which you're not, but you're venture capital that's very advanced in its processes. And from what you described, really that's best practice processes. And really congratulations for the great work. You still, of course, have improvements to do, but who doesn't? And you're a great example, I think, for the rest of venture capital and also even private equity who's listening to us today. We next have a question for Jose Moncada, who's a managing director of Bolsa Social Impact Fund that invests mainly in companies with social and environmental purpose. So, Jose, you have in other occasions explained briefly why impact investing is so important in the current very complicated context. And I would love you to elaborate further on the idea, as well as the thought that in this challenging context, in your view, do you find that the correlation of impact and returns will be proven?
Yes, thank you very much, Maria, for an introduction and for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here sharing this panel. So a few words about Bolsa Social Fund for those of you that doesn't know us. We are an impact investing fund recently created that we have launched with AFI, the financial consultancy firm, of 25 million. We have just made the first closing in 10 million. And our investors, they're all mainly private institutional investors. We are talking about financial entities, insurance corporations, mutualities, family office, foundations. The fund is leveraging on 5 years of experience of Bolsa Social platform that we have, where we have invested in more than 20 early stage social enterprises. And we have already made 5 investments with the fund. So where do we invest in? What kind of areas are we interested in? We're interested in companies, early stage companies that produce positive impact in well-being and health, education, sustainable production and consumption, action for the climate, and social integration and development. So, and what we have seen is that our investors, they are becoming more aware of the importance of impact investing. Why is so important impact investing? Because we have, as a society, we have tremendous challenges that we are facing. And as the financial system cannot ignore these challenges, we have to move from the paradigm of just making profit towards integrating the impact in what we do. And you said we mainly invest in social enterprises. No, we only invest in social enterprises. So our whole portfolio is focused on social impact. Companies that can produce positive financial return for our investors, but also are helping us to address all these big challenges that we have as a society. These challenges are very well framed in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations that we all know. I mean, there is a tremendous pressure that we have as a humanity in terms of our model. Our economic model is no longer sustainable. We have to change it. And this change has to be financed. We need investors to finance this change. We were talking about climate change just before the COVID crisis. COVID has not solved the problem of global warming. It just has covered it, but has not solved it. It's still there. It's the biggest challenge that we have as humanity. So we need to finance companies that are addressing this challenge. Also, there is a question of moving towards a society that is fairer, more inclusive. There's a lot of injustice. The gap between the rich and the poor has grown significantly, grew before the COVID crisis, and as a consequence of the COVID is growing in a bigger pace. There is a problem of aging population in the European Union. How are we going to address this? We need solutions. We need technology to address this problem. It's a question of social integration. We want to build a society. We want to finance companies that are building a society that integrates all its members, people with disabilities, migrants, and so on. And the good thing of impact investing is that we can use finance as a force for good. And this is the positive thing. This is the positive thing, because there is a balance that we can strike from conventional financing that only seeks profit and philanthropy that is seeking social change. We can take the best of both, integrate them. That is impact investing. That is impact. That's why we analyze our companies with the strictness of venture capital, but always looking at the mission. The mission, that's so important. And we can see that investors are gaining consciousness, and this is great. This is good because they understand that there is a new concept of profit. This is what I like to say. There's a new concept of profit. It's not only IRR. It's not only the economic benefits. It's as well the change that you are producing in society that should be considered your profit. Profit is what you want with your investments. So I want a profit, like some financial return, fair, adjusted financial return, but also I want a change. And that is why social impact is so important. We need to integrate the impact, positive and negative impact in our investments.
Thank you very much, Jose. Your words are really inspiring. There always is. And it's true that if you would have looked back a few years ago, what was impact investing and what it is now, I think Bolsa Social and Bolsa Social Impact Fund has immensely contributed to this huge change and helping it to become mainstream in the Spanish financial market. So thank you very much, because it does give a purpose also for all of us who work in the financial sector. I'm going to go back to the pure venture capital players that are here today with us, to Galdan and Seaya, represented by David and Carlos, because there's one question that intrigued me in the way you guys invest. You can have a variety of investment strategies, which can be majority packages, which allow a higher degree of ESG influence on the investee, or minority package with various players, obviously co-investing. Do you think this factor is decisive when either as a venture capital or fund of funds, you're trying to effectively influence ESG value creation levers? And if not, what other factors do you find key? If you want, David can start, and then Carlos, to be so it's easier for you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so thanks, Maria, for the question. As a first statement, I'd say that having a majority or minority, I wouldn't say that it's actually that a key factor when explaining to what extent ESG is more or less implemented. Because actually, most of the investments are minority positions in companies. So this would lead to think that maybe ESG can never be implemented at the VC world because of these minority positions. At the end, we believe that the successful ESG implementation can only be developed when the company believes and understands the rationale behind it. So we think that the role of the VC, independently of being a minority or majority investor, is guiding the company in terms of enlightening them about the best practices they see in the market, and also giving them examples or connecting to other companies in their portfolios that might be doing something different in terms of ESG. And also to give a bigger perspective on your question, and also relating to what you mentioned before, that ESG has been maybe more about the E than the other letters. Looking back a little bit, we see that the mainstream debate about ESG was more focused on the environmental part of it, right? So that might explain why the private equity started adopting ESG before venture capital, since their portfolios were exposed to mature companies with complex operations and in the physical world, and also large supply chains, which is something that VC portfolios were not that exposed to. And a proof of that is that when we started touching base with VCs 3 years ago, some of the first reaction was, why are you asking me about ESG when we are investing in software companies? So, and the same reply they got from their companies when they approached them. So what we think that has changed is that the debate has moved and has broadened somehow. And now it's not just the E, it's also about the S and the G. So right now it's also about staff diversity. It's also about compliance with data privacy rules, which is something that directly relates to the kind of investments that VC does. So when VC and companies operated in the tech space have realized that ESG has a broader meaning, I think it's I'd say that the key moment when the whole sector started realizing that ESG is something that it goes with them and it's important for them if they want to thrive in the future, and also if they want to keep attracting capital in the future.
Thank you, David. Carlos, your turn.
So, I mean, I fully agree with David. I mean, VC is a minority investment asset class. So by definition, the level of influence, or at least the level of voting rights that you have in a board to really force a manager to do something is limited. But I mean, there's several dimensions to take into account. I think it all depends first on the level of involvement that the fund has in the company. I mean, our approach has always been to make big bets and have more concentrated portfolios of, let's say, 12 to 14 companies per fund. So the idea has always been to be a more hands-on player with the companies when compared to other funds that have 2x or 3x the numbers of companies per fund that we have. And also, I think it's a matter of influence in the founders, given you can really not impose what you want as a minority investors, but what you need to be is what we call the founder's first call, and you need to coach them in what is really good and for the company. And as mentioned before, being ESG focused is good for the company and is good to attract capital in further rounds. And as many as our companies need further rounds of capital, you need to check the box on that sense. And in general, the founders are quite actively listening about that. I mean, additionally, what we normally do is address ESG with the founder upfront before investing and as part of our due diligence. And we agree in a common vision and strategy, and sometimes it's mentioned in a term sheet or in a separate side letter. So it's a discussion that we have with the teams when we onboard them. It's a discussion, an ongoing discussion during board meetings. And at the end, they know that they want to behave, or they want to have a positive impact to really access those pools of capital. So in general, we are aligned from the beginning, and it's a matter of also values and ethics. I mean, founders and teams are so important in VC, much more important than in buyouts, because there's not really the numbers or the track record in terms of financials really to support the investment, and the investment is mostly supported most of the times by the founders. So in reality, it's a discussion when you get into a company, and as part of that discussion, you also tackle the ESG and how you're going to address that and track that and really create that impact.
Thank you, Carlos. That's actually totally aligned with experiences we've had from Atalea with founders, where you actually find that they did have already some kind of ESG focus without even knowing that it was called ESG. So you just have to get them to understand that most of the values they have, or most of the practices they're actually doing, that falls under the ESG umbrella, which is very wide, and we just have to find what's material for the company and then just act on it. So thank you very much. That's really interesting. The final question I have, that's for the impact investing players here today, represented by the EIF, with Cyril as head of social impact, and then Bolsa Social with Jose Moncada, is about metrics, which are definitely challenging. there is still a lack of commonly accepted standard in impact investing. And the question for you is, are you using any particular standard, and what difficulties do you find to measure impact?
I'm happy to start unless you would want to, Jose.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So it's again, Maria, a good, very good question that that you're asking, because ultimately it is very tempting for an investor to use the same kind of standards, or let's say a list of commonly agreed indicators that an investor would tap into to define the impact made by a particular company. While this is tempting, because at least it allows to benchmark and aggregate the data, it is often how reporting can start diverging very much from what a company effectively does. In our view, metrics have to be company specific. So obviously, in some cases, you will have some shared indicators for some companies in a portfolio, but by definition, what we always claim, or what we always plead for, is that when it comes to designing impact indicators, they have to be company specific. And this is the only way where, with as less bias as possible, the impact indicator and thereon the impact scorecard that you have for a portfolio, for a company, sticks very much to what is the effective, genuine impact of a company. So that's one thing. So obviously, there are plenty of commonly agreed standards such as IRIS, and there are a number, and it's obviously something we are carefully looking at and also contributing at our level. But I cannot emphasize enough the fact that for an impact scorecard to work, indicators have to be company specific. Why? Because as mentioned in the earlier question, let's say that impact investing is about having at the core of your business model the resolution of a social issue. And if so it is, then that means you are addressing a particular social or environmental problem or issue in a very particular way. And because you do it in an innovative, hopefully particular way, as a manager of a company, you need to have company-specific metrics. Just an important one here is that if this is true for impact indicators, what we use, at least at our level, and Jose, you know that, and indeed that also echoes with what Carlos said earlier. If we do not use a commonly agreed list of indicators, what we do have is a methodology whereby when we invest in an impact fund, we have an agreement with the GP that 1 to 5 impact indicators, company specific, would be defined per portfolio company. And then next to these 1 to 5 indicators, quantifiable targets are set at the moment of the investment. And this way, we would monitor next to the GP and having this discussion on the advisory committee, typically, we would monitor on a yearly basis how much a company is ramping up its impact and eventually manages to achieve its objective and hopefully even beat its objective. So that's what I would say on this I mean, highly debated point. Jose, feel free to follow up.
Yeah, no, I mean, completely agree. Cyril, you have explained it perfectly. I mean, there are many methodologies. I mean, we were saying that there is a new concept of profit. We know how to measure IRR. That is very clear. But impact is part of this profit. And that's why we need to measure it. And there are many methodologies. We are following the methodology of the EVPA, the European Venture Philanthropy Association. that created in 2014 standards that are considered by the European Commission the highest standards in terms of measuring the impact. Cyril have explained it. You cannot have metrics for all of them. We have invested in companies that have developed IT for taking care of the elders at home, and company that has developed biofertilizers to have more sustainable crops, and a company that is developing innovative materials for sustainable fashion. The indicators are completely different, and it has to be specific. That's why we, for each company, we define what is the problem that they are addressing, what are the beneficiaries that are benefiting from the impact, and what are their targets in terms of transformation, in terms of impact. And for that, we use 3 indicators in our case that are specific for the impact that this company produces. They have to be simple to measure, but significant of the impact. And every year we measure, we put goals and we measure that. They report us quarterly, and we report to our investors. And as for your second question, yes, we have incorporated the element of a third independent party checking that this impact has been achieved.
Thank you, Cyril and Jose. That was actually, Jose, you touched upon one of the questions we had around verification. And when do you think it will become mainstream to make sure that impact investing really sticks to its essence?
I mean, if I may, that is key. I think it's key. It's not only measuring the impact, it's managing the impact, it's accompanying the companies and making sure that this impact is embedded in the bylaws of the companies. Even we link the variable of the salaries of the CEOs to the achievement of these goals, and because there's a question of market integrity. As someone was saying, this impact is becoming fashionable, and it's nice that it's becoming fashionable. It's good. It's much better. However, we need to make sure that when we say we're doing impact investing, what we present as impact investing is real. At the end of the day, what you need to show to your investors is the change that is produced by these companies, is the impact, is the transformation. And that's why it's so important to be transparent as to the methodology and the results. And also, it incorporates integrity to this process, having a third party validating that this has happened.
Jose, there's actually a question on the Q&A panel that we're happy to receive more questions, but the first one is for you. It's Carmen Garcia who was asking if you could repeat the impact indicators you use.
If I can repeat.
Yes.
I haven't mentioned them because they are different for the different companies. What I am saying is that we set, in agreement with the company in which we invest, 3 indicators in order to set objectives for each year that we measure together with the entrepreneur, and we validate with a third party. The indicators, as Cyril was mentioned, he explained it very well, they have to be specific for the company. For instance, the company that is, in which we have invested is producing a technology that is helping hospitals and insurance corporations and municipalities follow up the situation and the health of the elder population at home, which they require a lot of assistance and attention. Will be how many people are receiving this support, how many emergency situations have you discovered, and how much have you saved, how much money have you saved to the health system. That is very different from the company of biofertilizers and bioprotectors, because basically they address the problem of the abuse of chemicals in agriculture. It's a big environmental problem, and we eat that. We don't know what we eat. And the indicators there are completely different. They are the reduction of, in terms of liters of chemicals in the crops, thanks to the application of this alternative, more sustainable alternative and environmentally friendly. Second, the reduction of the application of, I don't know in English, oxidonitroso, which is nitrotic oxide that is applied is linked to the abuse of chemicals. And third, the improvement in terms of health of the crop. As you see, very specific indicators for very different than the others. We have invested in a sustainable fashion there. We are care about decent jobs, local created, CO2 saved, liters of waters that you save in this process, and so on. I could go on and on, but the question is that they have to be specific of the company.
Is this the frameworks you use? Like, do you go to IRIS, for example, from the Global Impact Investing Network, or do you use a variety of international?
I mean, we focus on the company and the project that is trying to solve, and we try to find 3 indicators that make sense and in accordance with following the EVPA standards that define very well how should be the indicators. We try to find indicators that are most meaningful of the impact. Trying to differentiate between Cyril knows this, all this jargon, outcomes, output, and impact. And therefore the IRIS catalog IRIS Plus catalog is very interesting catalog. For doing this.
Cyril, do you think the European Union will issue any kind of standards? Because really from the EIF sets the standards and is always ahead in regulating or trying to publish standards. What do you feel around that?
Yeah, there are plenty of initiatives going on, led by the European Commission, also at a wider DFI level. When it comes to Europe, there was a very important work that was done by the European Commission on defining impact taxonomy, and I encourage you to look at this initiative, the EU taxonomy. In general, the European Commission is also coordinating a group of experts called the GECES that is looking at coming up to a standard. And we are contributing to this debate. And I think it is also here, the challenge is to strike the good balance between having a commonly accepted, a widely understood framework, how you can gauge, how you can assess the impact achieved by a fund or by a portfolio of funds or portfolio of companies. It should never be at the expense of, let's say, the gap that ultimately could be created between the impact you report and the impact that is effectively created on the ground. So that's always what's at stake here. I mean, impact is a good thing is that everybody talks about it. It's a positive and that's contributes to the industry. What is important, I think, and it is important to mention in this conversation, is that what the push we're trying to give to the industry is that the impact data that are ultimately collected by underlying investments should not be only a reporting tool. The way we measure the impact, we do not make use of the data points by being a reporting data or you serving as reporting data, but rather serving the alignment of interest. So the capacity of the GP to meet its impact objective as per the methodology described earlier will also have an impact across the value chain from the investors to the GP to the portfolio companies on the financial incentive that can be, let's say, taken out from venture capital and impact investing in particular. So it is, in our view, impact measurement should serve as an alignment of interest tool rather than a pure reporting tool.
Understood. We're changing a bit of subject because we have a question for Carlos Fish from SEAIA. And it's really a very easy question, is how do you do your ESG reporting? Because there are the UN PRI, that's a transparency report. Do you do an internal and external report to LPs? How do you manage transparency, which is one of the PRI requirements?
So, I mean, because we're signatories of UNPRI, we do the reporting for UNPRI and we get our scoring. We're now doing internal ESG reporting to track our companies, as mentioned, and we are in the process now of thinking around how to report externally, either in our standard quarterly reporting or to do a separate ESG reporting as some managers are already doing. It's also a matter of resources. Now that we're raising the third fund, it's something that we're bringing to the table.
Thank you very much. I have a question also for you, and then we'll go also to impact about exit, which is really something that's challenging. Have you actually gone through an exit process with ESG within it? Is it to like secondary to other funds taking control? Do they actually value ESG in some way? Because ESG today doesn't have, let's say, a financial modeling like you would have just to any other cash flow or asset. How do you go along to investment? Have you experienced this before?
I mean, it's been more present in the funding rounds. I mean, when in companies we're raising, let's say we enter into a Series A, and when raising Series B or Series C, that's kind of an exit. Not really an exit, but because we're staying in the company, but it's a validation from a third party of the business model where they acquire either pure primary or also a secondary part of the shareholding. And what we've seen with a lot of our companies is that this is a big concern for them. In fact, there's some specific companies which have been invested by impact funds or funds that consider themselves by impact. I mean, there's an obvious candidate in our portfolio. There is Clarity, which is, again, as mentioned, a software that measures social impact for asset managers, and that qualifies as an impact investment, again, because it's measurable, it helps asset management understand. I mean, it's in the whole equation that we've been discussing. So there's a lot of validation from the market from those point of view. And also we've seen, as mentioned, that there's a larger pool of capital to be accessed if you are up to date with the ESG requirements of the market. And also if there's a negative feeling for companies that are not ESG friendly towards, again, getting further funding or also exits. In pure exits, I cannot really recall, I mean, there's obviously ESG due diligence to be done from the buying party, but there hasn't been a pure focus, not that I can remember.
Which makes sense because still at venture capital, it's still in development. But really thank you because it really clarifies this question. And then we're just going to wrap up with a few questions that were around impact investing for Jose Moncada, which talk about impact indicators. So are you talking about long-term result indicators or real impact, change, transformation indicators in people's life or planet? And how to balance return maximization versus social impact mission. So what factor is the priority? So if you'd like, I will go first to the first one, impact indicators, talking about results versus real transformation.
Yeah, so in a way, I already responded to this question. So the indicators, we always focus to the impact. The indicators, this is the EVPA saying, to the extent possible, has to go to the impact created, so the final transformation. Sometimes, and Cyril knows this very well, you cannot measure this because you cannot measure how well, for instance, the elder is feeling because he's been taken care better thanks to the technology that we have invested in. But there are other like proxies, indicators that already can direct us towards that information. It's rather measuring outcomes and not outputs, but outcomes that lead us to the as a proxy, help us to identify the real impact created by the company. And your second question was?
And the question is, between return maximization and social impact mission, what factor is a priority for you?
Okay, so this is a tricky one. The two factors are very important: the financial return and the impact. We have seen projects that seems to be very profitable, but very small impact, and we haven't invested in them. So we invest where we see that there is a market failure, where the market is not correcting a situation. So the SDGs, they are challenging and they're costly, and we cannot ignore this. So sometimes what we find is that our investors, at least in our portfolio, what we try to achieve is a balance between investments always with high impact that could be very profitable, because there are companies that the more they sell, the more impact they produce, and therefore the more profitable they are. Like I can tell you about this sustainable fashion, or and the one of the biofertilizers. The more they sell, the more profitable they are, the more impact they produce. But then there are other companies, and think about issues of social integration, where there is a company that is created to give jobs, for instance, to people with disabilities. There is going to be a little trade-off there between profit, return, financial return, and impact. But this is why I was saying that our investors are ready to understand that. They understand that. Of course, there's always the idea of seeking profit. This is investment, impact investment. But in certain cases, there is certain trade-off. And that's why I was saying that our investors understand this new concept of profit. New concept of profit is fair return, is good for me, but it's good for the rest of the society. It's impact as well. And this is integrated in the concept of profit.
Well, thank you very much. I think that was the last question. I would like to thank, again, ASCRI for organizing this really interesting panel, all of you for being here today, and our audience, which I think has sent a really high quality questions. So thank you very much. And I wish you all to stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.